I didn't tell anyone about the money when my husband died. Not my neighbors, not my friends, not even my own son. Looking back, that silence was the smartest decision I ever made. The day of the funeral felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life from a distance. The chapel smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, and people kept coming up to me, whispering condolences that blurred into one long, meaningless hum. I sat in the front row, hands folded tightly in my lap, staring at the closed casket as if I could force it open with my thoughts. 40 years. That's how long we had been together. And just like that, everything was gone. My son, Adrian, sat beside me. He had his arm around my shoulders, just like he used to when he was younger, and trying to comfort me after small things, burnt dinners, broken appliances, little inconveniences that once felt big. Now, nothing compared to this. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just different. On his other side sat his girlfriend, Clarissa. She wore black, of course, but everything about her felt too perfect. The dress, the makeup, even the way she dabbed at her eyes. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like performance. At one point, I caught her glancing around the room, not at the casket, not at me, but at the people. Observing, measuring, as if she were trying to understand something that had nothing to do with loss. "Mom, are you okay?" Adrian whispered. I nodded automatically. I wasn't okay. I wouldn't be okay for a long time, but something else had already started to bother me, something I couldn't yet explain. 3 days later, I sat in a quiet office across from a man who held my future in a folder. "Meryl," he said gently, adjusting his glasses, "your husband made very detailed arrangements." I barely heard the words at first. My mind was still stuck in the past, on breakfasts we'd shared, on arguments that now seemed meaningless, on the sound of his voice calling my name. Then the number appeared in front of me. I blinked. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "This must be wrong." "It isn't," the lawyer replied. $8 million. I repeated it in my head over and over, but it didn't feel real. We had lived comfortably, yes, but never extravagantly. My husband had always been careful, practical. I knew he invested, but nothing that would lead to this. "I didn't know," I whispered. "He wanted to make sure you were secure," the lawyer said. Secure. The word echoed in my mind long after I left his office. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the documents. The house felt different without him, too quiet, too still. Every corner held a memory, and every memory felt heavier now. I picked up my phone to call Adrian. Then I stopped. Something inside me hesitated. I couldn't explain it logically. It was just a feeling, small, quiet, but persistent. So I put the phone down. The next morning, Adrian showed up unannounced. He still had a key. Of course he did. He let himself in like he always had, calling out casually, "Mom?" I quickly gathered the papers from the table and slipped them into a drawer before he entered the kitchen. "Hey," he said, hugging me briefly. "How are you holding up?"
"I'm managing."
His eyes flickered toward the drawer. Just for a second, but I noticed. "What was that?" he asked. "Just paperwork," I replied. "Nothing important." He nodded, but something about his expression lingered too long. Then, almost casually, he said, "I was thinking about Dad's finances." I felt something tighten in my chest. "What about them?" "Well," he shrugged, "just making sure you're okay. You know, insurance, savings, things like that." The way he said it didn't feel natural. It felt rehearsed. "I'm still sorting everything out," I said carefully. "Maybe I could help," he offered quickly. "Go through things with you. Make sure nothing gets missed." I studied his face. This was my son, the boy I had raised, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys. But now, there was something else behind his eyes. Something calculating. That's kind of you, I said, but I'd rather handle it myself for now. His jaw tightened slightly. You don't have to do everything alone, Mom. I know. There was a pause. Then he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. After he left, I sat in the living room, staring at nothing. He had never asked about money before. Not once. And now, suddenly, it was one of the first things on his mind. The room went silent for a moment, and I could feel Clarissa watching me carefully, as if reassessing something. After they left, I sat alone again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, filled with thoughts I couldn't ignore anymore. I started replaying every conversation, every glance, every carefully worded question. It all pointed in one direction. They were trying to figure out how much I had. And worse, they were trying to figure out how to get access to it. The realization settled in slowly, like cold water rising inch by inch. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was understanding. A few days later, everything became clearer. I was in the backyard, tending to the small garden my husband and I had built together. It was one of the few places where I still felt close to him. The air was calm, and for a moment, I almost felt peaceful until I heard voices coming from the kitchen window. Adrian and Clarissa. They must have let themselves in again. I wasn't planning to listen. I really wasn't. But then I heard my name. She's being difficult, Clarissa said, her voice sharper than I had ever heard it before. There was no softness now, no sweetness, just irritation. I know, Adrian replied. Every time I try to bring it up, she shuts down. Well, of course she does, Clarissa said. She knows what she's sitting on. My hands froze around the gardening shears. What if she doesn't have that much? Adrian asked. Clarissa laughed quietly, and it sent a chill down my spine. Come on. Your father worked his whole life. You really think he left her with nothing? There's something there. There has to be. She won't tell me anything. Then you're asking the wrong way. There was a pause. We need to be smarter about this, she continued. You can't just ask directly. You have to make her feel like she needs help, like she can't handle it on her own. I felt my heart pounding now, loud enough that I was sure they would hear it through the walls. She's old, Adrian, Clarissa added, her tone almost dismissive. Eventually she'll slip. They always do. Old. The word hit me harder than anything else she had said. Maybe we're pushing too hard, Adrian muttered. No, she replied firmly. We're just not being strategic enough. That money is going to be yours eventually anyway. Why should we struggle now when she's probably sitting on it, doing nothing? Struggle. I thought about the expensive dinners they posted online, the new clothes, the way Clarissa always seemed perfectly put together. Their version of struggle looked very different from mine. I stepped away from the window quietly, my hands trembling, and walked back toward the garden. By the time they came outside a few minutes later, I was watering the plants as if nothing had happened. There you are, Clarissa called brightly, her voice back to that perfectly crafted warmth. We were just talking about future plans. I'm sure you were, I said, not looking up. Adrian hesitated before speaking. Mom, Dad never mentioned anything about savings, did he? Or investments? Just so we understand what you're dealing with. I straightened slowly and looked at him. Why would your father discuss private finances with you? He blinked, clearly not expecting that. I just meant if you need help. I don't. The look that passed between them confirmed everything I had heard. Frustration, calculation, impatience. That night, I sat on my bed with the documents spread out in front of me again. $8 million. The number no longer shocked me the way it had before. Now it felt like something else entirely. A target. I thought about everything I had heard. About the way Clarissa spoke when she thought I wasn't listening. about how easily my own son had been drawn into it. And something inside me shifted. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was preparing. I gathered the papers and locked them away again, this time with more care than before. Then I sat in the quiet room, staring into the darkness. They thought I was weak,
Confused.
easy to manipulate. They thought I didn't understand what they were doing. That was their first mistake. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be their last. After that day in the garden, I stopped seeing things the way I used to. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and suddenly every word, every gesture, every visit had a second meaning. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was something else in their eyes. A problem to solve. An opportunity waiting to be unlocked. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. Adrian didn't change immediately, but I could tell something was building. The patience he had been trying to show me started to wear thin, little by little. Clarissa, on the other hand, became more direct, but in a subtle way, like someone slowly tightening a net. The shift became obvious when the wedding plans started. I hadn't even known they were officially engaged until a thick, elegant envelope arrived in my mailbox. Cream-colored paper, gold lettering, the kind of invitation that feels expensive just to hold. I opened it slowly, reading every line twice, trying to match the luxury of it with the conversations I'd been having with them about struggling and tight budgets. When they came over later that week, Clarissa was glowing with excitement, spreading photos across my table as if we were sharing a joyful moment. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said, pointing at a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. "We wanted something unforgettable." "It certainly looks impressive," I replied carefully. Adrian shifted slightly in his seat. "We got a good deal," he added quickly, as if he needed to justify it. "A very good deal," Clarissa repeated, though her smile didn't quite match her eyes. I studied the images in silence. Everything about the wedding screamed luxury, hundreds of guests, elaborate decorations, a multi-course dinner. It didn't match the picture they had been painting for me over the past weeks. "This must be expensive," I said finally. There was a brief pause. "It's worth it," Clarissa answered smoothly. "You can't put a price on memories." "Maybe not. But you could certainly put a price on everything else." At first, they didn't ask for anything directly. Not right away. They eased into it like they had practiced. Small comments, casual mentions of unexpected costs, little hints dropped into conversation like breadcrumbs. "The photographer raised their price last minute," Adrian said one afternoon, rubbing the back of his neck. "Apparently, it's peak season." "The florist too," Clarissa added. "Everything is just adding up." I nodded politely, pretending not to notice where this was going. Then came the first request. "It's just temporary," Adrian said, his voice softer than usual. "We're a little short right now. About 3,000. 3,000. He said it like it was nothing, like it was the kind of amount people casually borrowed, without thinking twice. I folded a towel slowly, buying myself time. "That's a lot of money." "I know," he said quickly, "but I'll pay you back. After the wedding, after the honeymoon, things will settle down." I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, my only child. And yet, in that moment, I felt like I was speaking to a stranger repeating lines he didn't fully believe in. "I'm on a fixed income now," I said calmly. "I have to be careful." The disappointment on his face was immediate. Not sadness, disappointment. "But you must have something saved," he insisted. "Dad always talked about being prepared." "This isn't an emergency," I replied. "It's a choice." Clarissa reached out and gently touched his arm, her expression perfectly composed. "It's okay," she said softly. "We'll figure it out. Your mom has her own responsibilities." Her words sounded understanding, but her tone carried something else, something colder. They didn't ask again that day. But they didn't stop either. Over the next few weeks, the requests kept coming, each one wrapped in a different story. A deposit that couldn't wait. A dress that needed last-minute alterations. A vendor that refused to continue without additional payment. Every situation was urgent. Every solution seemed to lead back to me. I said no every time. And with each refusal, something in Adrian changed. The warmth faded. The patience disappeared. The guilt started creeping in. "I don't understand why you're being like this," he said during one phone call, his voice tight with frustration. "Dad would have helped. Your father would have taught you responsibility," I replied. There was silence on the other end. Then he hung up. The wedding day came anyway. Bright, perfect, almost unreal. The kind of day people dream about and remember forever. I wore a simple dress and the necklace my husband had given me years ago. As I sat among the guests, watching everything unfold, I felt strangely detached, like I was attending an event that had nothing to do with me. Clarissa looked stunning, of course. Every detail of her appearance was flawless. Every movement carefully timed. Every smile perfectly placed. Adrian looked happy. Or at least he looked like he was trying to be. During the reception, I watched them move from table to table, thanking guests, accepting compliments, posing for photos. When they reached me, Clarissa leaned in and kissed my cheek. "Thank you for everything," she said warmly. Everything. The word lingered in the air. "I hope you're happy," I replied. "We are," Adrian said quickly, his arm around her waist. Later that evening, Clarissa sat down beside me while the music played and the guests danced. "You know," she said quietly, "we've been thinking about the future." I didn't respond. "A house," she continued. "Maybe children. A real life together." "That sounds lovely." "It is," she said, turning slightly toward me. "But it's also expensive. Very expensive." There it was. Even on her wedding day, she couldn't help herself. "I'm sure you'll manage," I said. She smiled, but this time it didn't reach her eyes at all. It would just be easier with support. I met her gaze calmly. "I believe people should build their own foundation." For a brief moment, her expression cracked. Just for a second, but it was enough. 2 weeks later, the phone calls started again. But this time, they weren't polite requests. They were expectations. And I knew the situation was only going to get worse. After the wedding, something shifted completely. The polite tone, the careful phrasing, the fake patience, it all started to disappear. It was as if a line had been crossed, and now they no longer felt the need to hide what they wanted. The calls from Adrian became more frequent, more urgent, and less respectful. Every conversation began the same way, like a script he had memorized. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a bit of a situation." At first, the problems sounded believable. Car repairs, rent increases, unexpected bills. Life happens, I understood that. And, against my better judgment, I helped once. $500. Not because I believed the story, but because I wanted to see what would happen next. What happened next was exactly what I expected. The requests didn't stop. They multiplied. And when I started saying no again, the tone changed. "I don't get it," Adrian said during one call, his voice sharper than I had ever heard it before. "You're sitting there in that house, and you can't even help your own son?" The words were like a slap, but I kept my voice steady. "I already helped you." "That's nothing compared to what you probably have," he snapped. I went very still. "What makes you think I have anything?" I asked quietly. There was a pause, just long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "I mean, Dad had insurance, right? Savings. Investments." He was guessing, but not blindly. Someone had been feeding those thoughts, shaping them, pushing him toward conclusions that were getting closer and closer to the truth. After that conversation, I knew something important. It wasn't a question of if they would push further. It was a question of how far they were willing to go. I got my answer sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday morning.
Quiet.
Ordinary. I was outside in the yard, trimming the rose bushes my husband had planted years ago. It was one of the few routines that still brought me peace. The air was cool, the sun soft, and for a brief moment, everything felt almost normal. Then I heard car doors slamming. More than one. I looked up slowly and saw Adrian walking toward me, his expression unusually serious. Clarissa was right behind him, dressed sharply, like she was going to a business meeting. And with them, a man I had never seen before, holding a leather briefcase. My stomach dropped before a single word was spoken. "Mom," Adrian called out, his tone formal in a way that immediately put me on edge. "We need to talk." I set the shears down carefully. "About what?" He gestured toward the man. "This is Mr. Carter. He's a notary." A notary. The word echoed in my mind, heavy and unmistakable. "What for?" I asked. The man stepped forward with a polite, practiced smile. "Good morning, ma'am. I understand you may need assistance updating some legal documents." I looked at Adrian, then at Clarissa, and suddenly, everything became very clear. Clarissa moved closer, her voice soft, almost soothing. "Meryl, we've been doing some research about financial planning, especially for later in life." Later in life. Another carefully chosen phrase. "I already have a will," I said. "That's great," the notary replied quickly, opening his briefcase. "But wills can take time to process. What we're suggesting is something more efficient, a living trust." Adrian nodded, stepping in as if he had rehearsed this part. "It's just to make things easier, Mom. If anything ever happens, everything will already be handled." "Handled by who?" I asked. There was a brief silence.
"By me," he said.
"Of course." Clarissa smiled gently. "It's about protection. There are so many cases where older people get taken advantage of. Without proper safeguards, things can become very complicated." The irony was almost laughable. Here they were, warning me about manipulation while standing in my yard with a stranger and a stack of documents, trying to pressure me into signing away control of my own life. The notary began laying papers out on the patio table. Official-looking forms, dense text, signatures waiting to happen. "This would grant your son power of attorney," he explained. "He would be able to manage your finances, make decisions if necessary." "That's enough," I said. The words came out calm but firm. Adrian's expression tightened. "Mom, we're trying to help you. By bringing a notary to my house without telling me?" "It's not a big deal," he insisted. "This is standard. People do this all the time." "People who ask first," I replied. Clarissa leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Meryl, I know this might feel overwhelming, but you have to think about the future. What if something happens? What if you're unable to make decisions? What if nothing happens?" I countered. Another pause. Another look between them. I could see the frustration building now. The patience was gone. "You're being difficult," Adrian said.
"No," he replied calmly.
"I'm being careful." The notary cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "Perhaps we could go over the documents briefly, just so you understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, looking directly at him. "And I'm not signing anything today." Adrian exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Why are you making this so complicated? Why are you making it so urgent?" I asked. That stopped him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind for weeks. "How much do you think I have?"
They weren't expecting that.
Adrian blinked. "What?" "You're all very concerned about my finances," I continued.
"I'm curious."
What exactly do you think needs managing? Clarissa recovered first, her voice smooth as ever. It's not about the amount. It's about responsibility.
Of course, I said.
But you must have some idea. Adrian hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw everything. The assumptions, the expectations, the plans they had already made in their heads. I straightened up and brushed my hands against my apron. I think it's time for you to leave, Mom.
Now.
Something in my tone must have finally reached him, because he stopped arguing. The notary quickly gathered his papers, eager to escape the situation. Clarissa stood slowly, her expression tight, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the anger underneath. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Maybe, I replied, but it's mine to make. They left without another word. I watched them drive away, my heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly, but my mind clearer than it had been in months. They had crossed a line, not just emotionally, legally, and that changed everything. That evening, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the same table where my husband and I had shared decades of our lives. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not empty, focused. I reached for my phone and made a call, because if they were willing to go that far, then I needed to be ready for whatever came next. After the day they showed up with the notary, everything became very quiet. Too quiet. No calls.
No surprise visits. No urgent situations.
For almost 2 weeks, Adrian completely disappeared from my life. If I had known better, I might have believed he finally understood that maybe something in him had woken up after I told them to leave. But I did know better. Silence like that doesn't mean peace. It means planning. I used that time wisely. I met with my lawyer, went over every document again, and made sure everything was locked down tighter than ever. Accounts secured, permissions restricted, contingencies put in place. If anyone tried anything, even indirectly, it wouldn't be easy. Still, I couldn't ignore the emotional side of it. This wasn't just about money. This was my son, the boy I raised, the one I protected his entire life. And now I had to protect myself from him. That realization didn't hurt in a sharp way anymore.
It settled deeper than that. Heavier. Colder.
Then one Sunday evening the silence broke. A knock at the door. Not the usual quick entrance with his key. Not the casual "Mom" from inside the house. A knock. That alone told me something had changed. When I opened the door, Adrian stood there alone. For a moment, I barely recognized him. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted, and something else. Not angry, not defensive. Broken. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside without a word. He walked into the living room slowly, like he wasn't sure he belonged there anymore, and sat down on the edge of the couch. The same couch he used to jump on as a child. Now he sat stiffly, hands clasped together, staring at the floor. "Where's Clarissa?" I asked. "At her sister's," he said. "She doesn't know I'm here." That caught my attention. I sat across from him. "What's wrong?" He let out a long breath, dragging his hands over his face. For a while, he didn't speak at all. I waited. Finally, in a voice that barely held together, he said, "We're in trouble." I didn't interrupt. "The wedding, the loans, everything. It's falling apart." He swallowed hard. "We owe more than 60,000. The number hung in the air between us. Credit cards, personal loans, all of it. We can't keep up." I watched him carefully. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't manipulation. This was something else. "Clarissa says we should declare bankruptcy," he continued. "But I can't. I can't." "Why?" I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes red. Because I know Dad left you something. I know you're just being careful with it, trying to make it last. But Mom,
I'm drowning.
there it was. Even now, even like this. The assumption, the belief that there was money waiting to save him. For a moment, my heart ached.
Truly ached.
This was my son, sitting in front of me, desperate and lost. But behind that pain was something else, clarity. How much do you think your father left me? I asked gently.
He hesitated.
I don't know, maybe 50,000? 100? Something like that. I almost smiled. All of this, all the pressure, the manipulation, the schemes for what he thought was a relatively modest amount. And if I gave you that money? I asked. It would help, he said quickly. We could pay off the worst of it. Get back on track. I'd pay you back, I swear. And then what? He blinked. What do you mean? After that money is gone, I said calmly. What happens next? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I don't know. Exactly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard. The same yard where, just weeks ago, I had overheard them talking about me like I was already gone. Tell me something, I said. What does Clarissa say about me? He stiffened slightly. What? About my money. About my decisions. About who I am. He hesitated again, but this time longer. She thinks, he started then stopped. Say it. She thinks you're being selfish, he admitted quietly. That you're holding on to money while we struggle. That family is supposed to help each other. I nodded slowly. And you? I asked. I don't know what to think anymore, he said, his voice breaking. Everything's so messed up. I turned to face him. Then listen carefully, I said. He looked up. Your father didn't leave me 50,000, I continued. Silence. Not 100,000 either. His brow furrowed, confusion replacing exhaustion. He left me 8 million. The words landed heavily. For a moment, Adrian didn't react at all. Then his eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly, as if he couldn't quite process what he had just heard. 8 million, he repeated. Yes. The room felt completely still. I watched the realization unfold across his face, the shock, the disbelief, and then something darker. Understanding. The notary, he whispered. The papers. Oh, God. Yes. He stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps before stopping, running his hands through his hair. What have I done? He muttered. You've been manipulated, I said calmly. But you also made choices. He covered his face with his hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so. Stop, I said gently. Apologies won't fix this. He lowered his hands slowly. You have a decision to make, I continued. What decision? You can go home, tell Clarissa everything, and continue down this path, or you can decide who you want to be. He stared at me, struggling to understand. She married you believing there was money waiting, I said. Everything she's done has been leading to that. His expression changed again. A shift. A realization clicking into place. The stories, he said slowly. Her grandmother, all those examples. Yes. He let out a bitter laugh. She told me her grandmother died when she was a kid. I said nothing. The silence spoke for itself. He stood there for a long moment, then straightened, something in his posture changing. She's been playing me, he said. Yes. All of it. Yes. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. I'm going home, he said. And then, I'm going to find out the truth. He walked toward the door, then stopped, turning back to me. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, I said honestly. That depends on what you do next. He nodded once. Then he left. The door closed behind him, and the house fell silent again. But this time it felt different. because now everything was out in the open, and whatever happened next would change everything. The call came early in the morning, so early that the sky outside was still gray, caught somewhere between night and dawn. My phone rang sharply in the silence, pulling me out of sleep with a strange sense of urgency. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, already knowing it was Adrian before I even answered. "Hello." "She's gone." His voice sounded hollow. Not angry, not even upset in the way I expected, just empty. I sat up slowly. What happened? There was a pause on the other end, like he was trying to gather the pieces of himself before speaking. "I told her everything," he said. "About the money. About what you said. About all of it." I closed my eyes briefly. "And at first she didn't believe me," he continued. "Then I showed her everything I could, explained what you told me. And Mom," his voice tightened, "you should have seen her face." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. "She didn't even try to hide it," he said bitterly. "Not this time. She started talking, really talking, about plans, about what we could do, legal ways to challenge things, ways to prove you weren't capable of handling your finances." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "She wanted to put you in a care facility," he added quietly. "Said it would make things easier legally." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I was surprised, but because hearing it said out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. "And you?" I asked. "I told her no," he said immediately. "I told her I wasn't going to be part of that." There was another pause. "She called me weak," he continued. "Said I was throwing away the biggest opportunity of my life. Said I'd regret choosing you over money." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Don't be," he replied quickly. "You were right. About everything." I leaned back against the headboard, letting the silence settle for a moment. "What happened after that?" I asked. "She left," he said. "Packed her things, took whatever she could, and walked out. Cleaned out our joint account, too. Left me with the debt." Of course she did. It was almost predictable in its simplicity. "And now?" I asked. A quiet exhale. "Now I figure out how to fix my life." We stayed on the phone for a while after that. Not talking about money, not about Clarissa, but about small things. Real things. The kind of conversation we hadn't had in months. When we finally hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring out the window as the first light of morning began to fill the room. I expected to feel anger. Or relief. Instead, I felt something else. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally come out. No more guessing. No more pretending. No more carefully hidden intentions. Just reality. And reality, even when it's difficult, is easier to live with than illusion. Over the next few weeks, Adrian and I began something slow and unfamiliar. We started rebuilding. It wasn't easy. Trust doesn't return overnight. It doesn't even return quickly. But I could see the difference in him. The way he spoke. The way he listened. The way he stopped assuming and started asking. He filed for bankruptcy, something he had once refused to even consider. He moved into a small apartment, nothing like the life he had imagined with Clarissa. He found a job, something steady and simple, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't chasing something unrealistic. He started visiting me every Sunday. At first, the visits were quiet, a little awkward, like we were both learning how to exist around each other again. But slowly, they became easier. Familiar. "I keep thinking about everything she said about you," he admitted one afternoon. "About how you didn't care. How you were selfish." "And what do you think now?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "I think I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as a solution." The honesty in that hurt, but it also mattered. "That won't happen again," he added. I know, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. A few months later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I'm selling the house, I told him one evening. He blinked. Are you sure? I looked around the living room, the same room that had held decades of memories. Joy, arguments, laughter, silence. Everything. I'm sure. Why? Because I can, I said simply. Because I want something different. That was the moment I realized what the money really meant. It wasn't just security. It was freedom. The house sold quickly. A young family bought it. 3 children, full of energy, filling the space with a kind of life I no longer needed but was happy to pass on. Watching them walk through the rooms didn't make me sad. It made me feel complete. I kept only what mattered. A few personal weishi, photos, memories that couldn't be replaced. The rest I let go. Adrian helped me move into a smaller place. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Something simple, comfortable, easy to leave behind whenever I wanted. Because I wasn't planning to stay still. I booked a trip, I told him one Sunday. He smiled. Where to? Somewhere warm, I said. Somewhere far. He laughed softly. Dad would have loved that. Yes, I said. He would have. And I think, in a way, he knew I'd get here eventually. Months later, I found myself standing on a balcony overlooking the sea, watching the sun dip below the horizon in colors that didn't feel real. The air was warm, the world quiet, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. I thought about everything that had happened, about loss, about betrayal, about the choices we make when we think no one is watching. And I realized something important. Strength doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence, like patience, like knowing when to say no, even to the people you love, especially to the people you love. Adrian and I still talk, still see each other, not because we have to, but because we choose to. And that choice means more than anything else. As for Clarissa, I don't know where she is now, and I don't really care, because in the end, she didn't take anything from me. If anything, she showed me exactly how strong I really am. And that was worth more than any amount of money.